This is going to be a difficult episode
How come?
because I can't wrap my head around this story.
Good. Good.
I could not tell you what happened.
That's fine. That can be as much a part of the episode as anything, because you shouldn't have waited to read it. You shouldn't have waited so long. It's a head scratcher.
Well,
It's actually really straightforward. It's just that Henry James does not say anything in a straightforward manner.
Yeah. Maybe the potential autism is too strong in me today. Because I'm not getting this, I don't understand. It's just a bunch of nonsense.
Let's start recording.
Let's.
And talk, all right?
All right.
Hold on real quick. Let me make sure I'm not recording too loud. Okay, there we go. We good? Yes, we're good.
Yep.
All right, ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1, click.
Click. All right, we're in. We're done. It's recording. We're not done. We're just getting started.
Are we just getting started?
We're always getting started.
We're just getting started. You're just getting started because you don't know what's going on.
I have no idea.
So, ladies and gentlemen, before this episode began, Willow's just like, listen. This week's story is a bit of a well, first I thought you were going to say, I'm not going to be very good in this episode because this story was just too traumatic.
No.
What is the problem with this week's story, then?
The problem is that it was written by Henry James.
It was written by... But wait a minute. You've read The Turn of the Screw.
Yeah.
Which is also very vague.
It is. The thing is, I read The Turn of the Screw after seeing the stage play.
So I
knew what was going on.
I can tell you one thing. There is a television adaptation of this story that in no way clears things up. In fact, it's so boring, I couldn't make my way through it, and it was only like 25 minutes long. By the way, I really love this story.
I'm glad. I'm sure once I understand it, I'll have some appreciation for it.
I mean, I don't know if you'll, you don't have to. It's not. There's not a prerequisite that you have to enjoy the story.
That's true. I have made it clear that there are a few I haven't enjoyed. The problem is that I can't not enjoy the story because I can barely read the story.
Yeah, it's not a matter of like, oh, I didn't care for what he was going for so much as what is he going? Huh? No, yeah. I will tell you this. I had to read this story a few times and then like look up a bunch of stuff on it and go back and reread whole just chunks to be like, oh, because he doesn't say in one sentence what he can say in one very long sentence.
No.
Yeah.
I read Turn of the Screw many years ago. I forgot how much I dislike this style of writing.
So, we've discussed Henry James, but only in the context of The Innocents. We discussed the old screw turner back in the day. But what is oh, by the way, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And it's Del Toro time. It's Del Toro
time.
Woo! Woo! And this is a pretty big episode for us.
It's the last story in Medusa and the Shield.
Which is the second book in the what?
The Dark Descent, edited by David G. Hartwell.
David G. Hartwell's The Dark Descent, Medusa and the Shield, which is the section all about?
Psychological horror.
Right, and I would say that if this is horror to you, then this is as psychological as it gets. What is our friend Mr. Hartwell have to say about Henry James?
Well, about this story specifically, this is apparently the best. Oh no, that's Turn of the Screw. Never mind. James's fiction sits like the tallest skyscraper, casting a shadow over all of 20th century fiction.
Aw, how
Fanatically
nice.
polished and detailed, and ultimately unfathomable because it is consistently interpretable on many levels. Yep. No one of which exhausts the potential meaning. Accurate.
I would say that probably sums it up pretty well.
Apparently, The Jolly Corner is his finest ghost story in the short story form.
Some people say that. Many people say that. I think one of the other things that really stands out about this story is this was one of his last stories. So like Turn of the Screw was like kind of a career, like the guarantor of his career. And this is kind of in the twilight of his career, kind of a reflection back on his past, on the mistakes he may or may not have made. It's semi-autobiographical, which is weird. It's something else. So Henry James, what do we call him? Jimmy Hank?
I don't know.
Old Jimmy Hank himself. He was born in 1843, and his father was Henry James Sr. And his father was also like a really famous theologian and writer and speaker at the time. If you look at pictures of all these guys, they look like the most self-serious human beings on the planet. But then you read about them, and they're like a lovable chap. Like, he and his father loved nothing more than playful tousling of the hair and hilarious rolling abouts on the floor. Apparently they had a really good family life, but his dad, like at some point in the 19th century, his dad, who was a Calvinist, discovered the teachings of Edmund Swedenborg, who was the founder of the Church of Swedenborgianism.
All right.
Which is a spiritual movement in the like most spiritual movement sense of the word. Like there is a veil beyond which we cannot see. There are spirits around us. I believe Swedenborgianism may have been the source of the whole like devil and angel on your shoulder concept. I think that because it's like we're surrounded by spirits, angels and devils, and they influence like what we do and what we say. But the big thing about Swedenborgianism that plays into this story, and we haven't even talked about the story yet, plays into this story is there's a thing in Swedenborgianism that Swedenborg taught called vastation. And you'll hear about vastation when you read about James and James Sr. And vastation is the idea that in order to achieve pure spiritual like centeredness, to become a purely like to get on the right path to heaven, basically, is you have to go through this thing called a vastation where you you didn't understand the story well enough, so you may not have even got this. You have to confront your darkest self. Like all of your sins, all of your evil potentials, everything, every bad thing you've done, every negative aspect of it. Basically your dark side, like your negative
your
image.
Evil twin.
Yes. You have to basically confront that and come to terms with it and accept it and then move on with your life. And it's apparently a very difficult psychological thing to do. And it's what James Sr. went through before he converted fully to Swedenborgianism.
I did read a summary of this story because I wanted to be able to talk about it. So don't worry. I have a bit of idea of actually what happened in it. Just not all of the intricacies.
Yeah, there's a lot of intricacies. And by the way, the story we are discussing is, of course, the Jolly Corner. The jolliest of corners, the name of which might be ironic.
Yeah? Really?
Oh, maybe that corner ain't so jolly. So are you comfortable talking about the plot, or would you like me to cover it really quickly? How do you want to do this?
I can do my best.
All right. You do your best. I'll ride shotgun.
Okay.
And if fill you in if you miss any of the high points.
Okay. So from what I think, this is about a guy who lived in New York for a long time.
All right.
33 years.
No, wrong.
No. How many years?
He moved away from New York in his early 20s and lived in Europe for 33 years.
Got those two things switched around.
Which is exactly what Henry James did.
Yeah, because Henry James was born in New York and then died in London.
Right.
Okay. He
Continue.
returns to New York. That's what it is. He comes back to New York, and there's a house.
Go on.
There's a house that he owns.
He has inherited two properties.
Yeah.
A house and a block of flats.
Yeah.
And he grew up in the house. And that's what he calls the Jolly Corner.
He's not going to sell the house or let anyone live in the house. He just has this one woman who cleans the house and takes care of it.
Yes.
Maintains the house. And then there's another woman named Alice.
Yes.
I don't know what their relationship is.
So Alice Staver. So our character's name is Spencer Bryden, which is one of those fake names that sounds like a fake name. Like, it sounds like a name someone created for a story. I was always distracted by that. Also, Alice Staverton also seems like a fake name.
What's the other woman's name?
Mrs.
Murdoch?
There's only like 3 characters. Mrs. Muldoon.
Murdoch is from a different story.
I am sure there's a Murdoch. Mrs. Muldoon's the housekeeper. Alice Stavro. So the way the relationship is that when they were young, he and Alice were like best friends. And then he went off to Europe, didn't talk to her the whole time, comes back and is like, she's the only one around here I still know. We were good friends. We're still good friends. It's like I never left. And although no one ever comes right out and says it, oh, by the way, Alice is totally in love with Spencer.
Yeah, I got that vibe.
Yeah, like, absolutely. She's also a really cool character, I think. She's really independent. She's never married. She's never been with a guy. She's older. Because they're both in their 50s. And she just ribs him a lot. She's constantly just, like, joking around with him. He's really kind of uptight, but she's just kind of like, and she keeps dropping these broad hints about, like, you know, I never got together with anyone. You know, I always liked you. You know, like, we always see eye to eye. We're so on the same side of things.
Meanwhile, he's dealing with the horrors of existence.
Yes, he is having an existential breakdown. He literally decides to haunt his own house.
Yeah.
Because he thinks that there is a ghost living in his old house of himself. It's a ghost. He believes there's a ghost of himself haunting this house that is a ghost of himself had he never left America. And so he's going to haunt the house. And he goes there like every night after he hangs out at his gentleman's club. He's going to go there every night and haunt the ghost and like hunt this ghost throughout the house. Like, that's his goal. He's going to find this ghost by haunting it, which is the craziest switcheroo of any haunted house story.
It is, however, a power move.
Oh, yeah. It is. It's the ultimate power move. If your house is haunted, what do you just go haunt the ghost? Don't leave the ghosts alone.
Good advice.
Yeah. And he doesn't tell anyone he's doing this. He's doing it in secret. The Mrs. Muldoon is terrified of the house. She won't go there at night. She thinks there's something in it.
Alice has seen his alter ego.
Yeah.
In her dreams twice.
Right. And he wants to confront this. He's starting to have these deep regrets about having left America. And he thinks, because his family is super rich, the reason they have these properties is because they were like big into real estate in New York back at like the birth of the city. And he regrets having, you don't really know what he did as a young man. He's just been sort of blowing his life off in Europe. You get the hint that he's done some pretty dicey things as a guy. The
intro of this story confused me so much.
How come? Oh, because it has nothing to do with anything else.
Yes. It's like he's being... It's so confusing. I was like, is he being interviewed by someone? Like, what is going on?
And he's just hanging out with his old friend Alice. Because how does it start? It's like...
Everyone asks me what I think of everything, said Spencer Bryden, and I make answer as I can. Begging or dodging the question, putting them off with any nonsense. It wouldn't matter to any of them, really.
Yeah, you were dropped into the story in the middle of a conversation.
Yeah,
and because he's just like, everyone always asks me what I think of things, and I'm like, no one wants to hear what I think about things. I don't even know what I think about things. Like, and Alice is like, okay, great. So haunted house.
Yep.
He refuses to have the house any furniture put in the house, and I love that Alice says something like, well, don't you, isn't it a shame to leave this place uninhabited? And he's like, it's totally inhabited. It's inhabited by like the history of everyone who's lived and died here.
Yeah.
And he regrets having left. And a lot of what this story is about, for the beginning of it at least, is like, and this totally ties in with like all these readings that we did this year for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur about regret and the fact that regretting something you've done in life is super hard, and coming to terms with that. But even harder at times is regretting things you didn't do, regretting missed opportunities, things you could have done to make your life more awesome. And we spend a lot of time in our lives in this sort of false future that never happened.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the story is him like totally regretting not having stayed in New York, not having stayed with Alice, who is totally into him, not having had this life. What we learn, of course, is that there's a good chance that if he had stayed in New York, he would have become just like the rest of his family. Yeah. These jerks, these robber barons, these real estate tycoons, these basically Trumps.
Yeah.
Who had miserable, rich lives and nobody liked. Yeah. And how he kind of escaped all that, but at the cost also of not having been with Alice and having had a constructive life. There's a really cool thing at the beginning where he goes to visit the block of flats that they're rebuilding to rent out, and he discovers when he's talking to one of the foremen that he's actually really good at this.
Yeah.
And I really like that scene. He's like, wait a minute, I know this stuff. I'm good at this. I can talk to foremen. I know about building buildings. I get this. It makes sense. Oh my God, I've wasted my life. I should have been here doing this. I don't do anything. And this is the one thing I've been good at my whole life, and I never knew it. Mm-hmm. I know that feel. I know that feeling. It's called Oh boy, I had a really successful fringe show this year. Wish I thought about doing this about 30 years ago. Yeah. So that's like the premise. Does it make a little more sense to you now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I got it. Like, I understood because I read the summary after reading this just to be like, what is happening? This is I'm normally very good with metaphor and like subtleties, but when it's just thrown at me constantly, I get overwhelmed.
It's an overwhelming story. Like, I was going to pick, the great fact all the while, however, had been the incalculability since he had supposed himself from decade to decade to be allowing, and in the most liberal and intelligent manner, for brilliancy of change. He actually saw that he had allowed for nothing. He missed what he would have been sure of finding. He found what he would never have imagined. Proportions and values were upside down. The ugly things he had expected, the ugly things of his faraway youth when he had too promptly waked up to a sense of the ugly, these uncanny phenomena placed him rather, as it happened, under the charm, whereas the swagger things, the modern, the monstrous, the famous things, those he had more particularly, like thousands of ingenuous inquirers every year come over to see, were exactly the sources of his dismay. This is just their way of saying, there's a lot of new buildings in New York, and he's really kind of put off by the fact that there's a lot of new stuff around. Like, it's just, but you're getting this, you get this sense of this guy's, like, his brain won't stop thinking. Like, it won't stop working. And unfortunately, neither will mine. And so reading this is just like being trapped in somebody else's head who's just like...
That's part of... this. I had the same issue with a excerpt of a story that we read for my literature class. It was... what is it called? It was a story by a woman. I can't remember what it was called. But it was about it. Oh, it was the opening scene, and it was about a woman. And the reason we were reading it was because the style was pretty much all in her head. Like, every thing that we read was given to us through her thought process. Mm-hmm. So it jumped around a lot. And it really felt like I was just reading my own ADHD brain.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get myself to enjoy it.
One thing James also does is he writes the way... It's very florid writing, very beautiful writing, very poetical. But he also writes the way people tend to think or talk, in the sense that, well, like I've been doing this whole time, he will interrupt his own sentences with side thoughts and then get back to the beginning of the sentence in a very, like, natural way when you read it out loud, or if you listen to someone read it well. Like, I actually listened to this story at one point because I was like, I'm not getting some of this. And then when I listened to it, I was like, oh. It
was Mrs. Dalloway. That's what we were
oh my God. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Not exactly one of the more, like, straightforward writers.
Both Molly and I, when we read the story, we were both like, huh?
Right.
Like, I got it because I understood the way it was working. Mm-hmm. But my brain was just like, no, we're already doing this.
I find Henry James and Virginia Woolf similar in that, like Shakespeare, once I get the rhythm and everything, I'm kind of okay. I'm like, okay, but it takes like pages before my brain like readjusts to, and then I'll read something else and I'll be like, this is too simple. So
see, I don't have issues with reading Shakespeare. It flows for me really well. Mm-hmm. But with stuff like this, I don't. Maybe it's because I read too fast.
It could be. This is so the Jolly Corner is one that I had to. I kept having to stop and just be like, okay, let me parse just this one sentence. Not because I'm not getting the plot, but because there's so little plot at times that I think I'm losing the thread of why any of this is important. Because he stops going to the house for a while. For 3 nights he takes a break because he's like, this isn't getting me anywhere. I'm gonna fool the ghost by not showing up one night. And then he goes back, and that's where we get the most, like, phantasmagorical, like, he's playing pretend. He's pretending to be, he's like a little kid pretending to hunt a tiger through this house. And then at some point, there's a switch gets flipped, and he realizes that the ghost is now hunting him.
Yeah.
And he gets freaked out, and doors start closing by themselves. Doors are left open. There's a lot of door imagery in this. Oh, also, by the way, Henry James may have been gay, and this story may be about that as well. Like, there's a lot going on, like his relationship with what's-her-face. Like, there's a lot going on.
There's on one of the pages. There was one section that I did actually like. That I really enjoyed reading. He liked, however, the open shutters. He opened everywhere those Mrs. Muldoon had closed, closing them as carefully afterwards so that she shouldn't notice. I really liked that. Mm-hmm. I liked the metaphor there.
There is a lot of opening and closing metaphor in this. A lot of, like, doors you close behind yourself, doors you open in front. If you've ever seen The Others, there's a lot of metaphor in that with closing doors behind yourself and opening doors ahead of you.
Makes sense for what this story is about.
Mm-hmm. And James knows what he's doing. A lot of this story is about the pathway we take through life and the choices we make, the options we leave open, the options we have closed behind us. And when he finally confronts this, or when the ghost confronts him, he tries to escape the house and the ghost is standing there waiting for him. Also, there may be 2 ghosts. It's left a little vague.
Yeah.
It's a ghost of himself hiding its face in his hands. But the fingers, 2 of the fingers are missing on one hand. And when it shows its face, it's like this, such a hideous monstrosity, he doesn't recognize it.
Yeah.
Until it comes rushing at him. And this is that vastation that we were talking about at the beginning. Like, confronted with the ugliness of your... Not even yourself, like something you have in you, I guess.
Yeah. I do love literature jump scares. I do think they're very fun.
It is a literary jump scare.
Yeah.
It's very much a Jamesian wallop, not a Henry James, an M.R. Jamesian wallop. Where like, that's really hideous.
Yep.
Except he's not being confronted by a ghost. He's being confronted by
himself, but
also like, is it super? Like, if it weren't for Alice Staverton, 100% I would be like, this is all in his head. Mm-hmm. But there's this little thing where she's like, while you were confronted, and he passes out and he wakes up, he's laying with his head in her lap.
Yeah.
And she's like, at the same moment this happened to you, I had a nightmare about this guy myself. Yeah. And he's like, and we have this part of the story that actually, like, I got teary-eyed over the ending of this story. Mm-hmm. Because she's like, I didn't dislike this guy. And he's like, what? And she's like, he's like, you liked him? And she's like, I told you weeks ago, my imagination had worked so over what you might. Oh my God, I can't even parse this sentence.
I could have liked him.
I could have liked him. He was no horror. I had accepted him. And Bryden's like, accepted? Before, for the interest of his difference, yes. And as I didn't disown him, as I knew him, which you at last confronted with him in his difference so cruelly didn't, my dear. Well, he must have been, you see, less dreadful to me, and it may have pleased him that I pitied him. And he's like, and then she's like, I didn't say I like him better. Mm-hmm. He's grim, he's worn, and things have happened to him. And she says, I recognized, oh my God, what is it?
I recognize basically, the kind is for his poor ruined sight and his poor ruined hand.
And
his
Bryden
right hand.
His Bryden says, he has $1 million a year because he thinks that if he had stayed, he'd be a millionaire. Mm-hmm. But he hasn't you. And she says, and he isn't you.
Yeah.
And that's how the story ends. And some people feel the ending of this story is very sinister, that he is given over control of his life to another person, like that she is like kind of taking advantage of his like weakness. But I've read a lot about it, and there's a billion different ways you can see this. There's a lot of little hints in there about her behavior that can be construed as like very kind of destructive. Mm-hmm. But there is something about the ending of this story where she's just like, she says basically, if this had been you, I would have still liked you. Mm-hmm. Because you're still you. Like, you're you.
Yeah.
And I've always liked you. And some are like, sad ending because look at what he missed out on. But in this, I'm like, that's what?
Like they're going forward together now.
That's how I see it.
Yeah.
I see it as her being like, the essence of you is what I like. That's what I love, and I've always loved. Mm-hmm. And we all have these dark possibilities in our lives. But deep down, you're you, and you're just you. And so is he. And I don't know. I really like this story. And I got all choked up at the end, because I'm a softie for anyone accepting another person for who they are.
Yeah.
Because he's not a bad guy.
No.
He's just slept around a lot and got involved in some weird cults, he says. But who knows what that means. His family's the bad people. Oops.
It really is just a story about a guy who is like, I didn't like live the way I should have lived. And then he's like, oh wait, if I had lived the way I should have lived, it would have sucked. Then he's like, oh wait, there's a girl that likes me. This is great.
And so one of the readings has to do with the fact that Henry James may have been gay. There's a lot of evidence. This isn't just like wild speculation. There's a lot of evidence to that effect.
Yeah.
Just in his letters and in the things people wrote about him and the things he wrote about himself and the fact that he never married. He never had a female companion of any sort. And so there is one reading in this that he ran away from that as a young man. And could be a story about how he's like, I should have just stayed home and would have helped the family, and I could have just, and how she is at the end saying, I like you, like, you're okay, man, like, it's okay, like, you are who you are, and that is fine, like, and it's not romantic. She's just comforting a friend who is coming to terms with the fact that there are things about himself that he may not find he may find unsavory because of the times.
Yeah.
But that she's like, no, you're a good guy. Like, I really like you. I just really like you. I don't know. There's something there.
It feels kind of like, you know, when you're writing a story, not for like anyone else, but just for yourself, because there's something that you wish you had.
Mm-hmm.
It feels kind of like he's writing this story, specifically the ending, for people who don't have that acceptance. Like, or for people who don't think they will.
Yeah, it does seem a little prescriptive in that sense. A little like, hey readers. Hey readers.
You're accepted.
Right.
Like, if somebody can accept real estate mogul, whatever this guy's name was, Spencer Bryden, you can also be accepted.
Yeah. And so this story came out. When did this story come out?
In the 19-somethings.
In the 18-somethings. Was it the 18-somethings?
I thought it was the 19-somethings. I don't know. When did he stop writing? Did he stop writing like long before he died?
1908. So, yeah, he died in
1916, I believe.
1916. Yeah, so he had a few years left, but this was definitely the end of his life. Oh, we also Portrait of a Lady was another one of his big novels.
Yeah.
Portrait of a Lady. He wrote a bunch of plays as well. But he's considered an American writer. Even though he lived in Europe most of his life, because he tended to write about things from the perspective of an expat, and so he's considered an American writer, one of the most important writers of English letters, and definitely one of the most studied. But I think that this story, The Jolly Corner, as not jolly as it ends up being. And it's called I think I mentioned it's called the Jolly Corner because that's what they always refer to their house as. Because it was a nice place to grow up. He actually had a pretty good childhood, and I can see why this story gets studied a lot and included in a lot of. I don't know if it was like a terrifying story.
No, it's definitely a study-worthy story.
Yeah. There's a lot of themes going on here.
I probably would have had an easier time with the story if it had been in a classroom.
And you'd had a little more time.
Yeah, and I had that like structure of, because we would have, if in a classroom, I have a feeling you would have read part 1.
No, right.
Talked about that, read part 2, talked about that, and then read part 3.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in this story. Like, every paragraph is just jam-packed with
stuff,
writing, pontification, thoughts. There's this whole conversations between him and Alice about just ideas in life, which is, I guess, the way Henry James grew up. His family life was like, let's talk philosophy, kids. Yeah. And so he grew up just like in a very like progressive household. Like, his father was very progressive as far as like human rights went, as far as education went, and like treatment of children went. So he was taught to just think constantly. And I think that shows in his books. Yeah. Think constantly. But definitely a psychological horror story. Definitely, I mean, almost literally the Medusa in the Shield, seeing your reflection and being paralyzed by it, like, which literally happens in this story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, do you have any more thoughts on the Jolly Corner?
I might reread it just so I can maybe understand what is happening.
Yeah.
Like, I understand what's happening. I want to know what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, he says our boy David
G. Hartwell.
David G. Hartwell says in the thing, the story occupies the border territory between the second and third streams of horror. And it's the last story in the Medusa and the Shield. So basically what he's saying is, this story is kind of our bridge to the next chunk. Do you know what the next chunk is called?
You said that like Dora.
Dora the Explorer?
Yeah. Do you know?
Oh. Do you know what the next chunk is called, boys and girls?
It's called A Fabulous Formless Darkness.
A Fabulous Formless Darkness. And this is going to have a lot more horror in this next section.
Yeah.
And the first, what is the name of the first story?
Smoke Ghost by Fritz Lieber.
Smoke Ghost, which I actually went ahead and reread the other day because I was like, I can't wait to, I want to see how this, the Smoke Ghost, if you read it right after reading this, which we will, you're like, it's like, yep, I can see where this is like, let's just jump this gap now.
All right.
I'll tell you right now, Smoke Ghost is considered like one of the early stories that basically takes what was happening back when Henry James was writing and just starts marrying it to modern society and modern thought and is like, what if there was a smoke ghost is basically the premise. And it actually is not to influence your reading, but I think it's a pretty freaky story. So,
all right, well, we'll see.
Yes, we will see. I'll leave that up to you. So Willow, how's it been going? Any news to tell our lovable listeners?
I passed the driving test, not like the actual driving test, but the written exam.
Woo! What's next?
Applying for a permit.
Applying for a
which
permit.
I have to figure out how to do.
Any Guillermo del Toro news?
He's making Frankenstein.
Isn't that weird? I think it's about having made Frankenstein now 7 or 8 times. It's time to make Frankenstein.
Yep.
Yeah, so Frankenstein it looks like it's gonna happen. Even though he said, like, after Pinocchio, he was like, I'm never directing a live action movie again. He's like, I'm only doing animation from now on. And then he's like, but I'm gonna do Frankenstein. And it looks like Barry Giant may get revived. So who knows what's gonna happen with this guy.
Who knows? That's the fun of it.
Wouldn't it be wild though if we had another Guillermo del Toro movie to cover in a bit? Like, we've been doing this show for so long, we just keep going to the theater and seeing Guillermo del Toro movies.
I mean, that's the purpose of this show.
I want us to get to a point where we have seen as many Guillermo del Toro movies in the theater as there were Guillermo del Toro movies before we started doing the show.
I don't know if that's gonna happen.
So hang in there, folks. Oh, at the rate we're going, we still haven't done that comedy yet. What was it called? Defending Your Life.
Defending Your Life.
So yeah, so hold on to your pipes, because the Smoke Ghost is next.
And then once we finish The Dark Descent, we'll do some more movies.
We'll do some more movies. And hey, if you're in the Twin Cities area and you want to come see me, you can come see me at the Strike Theater on October 19th. I will be performing that Thursday night in a storytelling event. Sharon, I'm going to be doing some storytelling, like 15 minutes of storytelling. So if you want to come see me gad about on stage, and if you can't make it there and you're in the Twin Cities area, I'm doing it again November 16th, Thursday night. So Strike Theater, check that out.
I'll also be there, not performing, just watching.
Well, I have to get you to yell something out at me from the audience.
I mean, always.
Willow, what's the word I'm forgetting?
Why would I know?
What was the word I was always forgetting?
You were always forgetting the religious
Presbyterian?
I thought it started with an E.
Episcopalian.
That's
I was
the one Mitzi always called out because I don't know. I can't pronounce that word.
Episcopalian. Yeah, we're talking about my one-man show from this summer, which if you didn't see it, shame on
Unless
you.
You're like not in the Twin Cities.
Shame on you.
Ah, my jaw.
And what, did you just hurt yourself?
No, my jaw needs to crack, but it won't crack.
Well, we'll let you go then so that you can get to that jaw-cracking adventure. So check this out. Hang out with us next time when we move on to some spooky dukes. Until then, I am Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when It's Del Toro time.
Goodbye.
No, wait. I almost hung up.